Well, and one of the things we do on Veterans Radio is tell today's veterans stories so that it doesn't just go by the waysides like our grandfathers kind of did because nobody ever talked about it. So that's why we're glad to have you on today.
Very true. Very true. Those stories don't get told nearly enough, and when you do, you're amazed by what you hear.
And what I want to talk about a little bit is not so much what happened in Afghanistan, but what you've done afterwards. But you got to Afghanistan in 2010, and shortly, we all know that Afghanistan was IED central. And unfortunately, you were a victim / survivor of a couple of IED attacks, one impacting traumatic brain kind of injury in September of 2010, and a worse, if you will, in some ways, IED accident in March of 2011, where you lost your right leg. Obviously, very defining moments in your young life, and kind of forced you into reevaluating or figuring out how the hell am I going to get through all this. So, without dwelling on either of those IED incidences, why don't you tell us a little bit of the story?
Well, it's funny that you would word it as one as a brain injury and the other one more dramatic, as I would actually define them the opposite way. The first one, I took less damage, and I had a buddy who lost 3 limbs and another individual who lost 2 limbs in that explosion. And the catastrophe from it was much more damaging to us as a unit, and visually it was a lot to take in. And I wasn't there but just shy of a month, and we got thrown into a real serious situation real fast. And all things considered, it turned out well, but I had to spend some time in Kandahar, kind of collecting your thoughts, so to speak. They want to make sure you're okay to go back to duty. So I had some time to process that ordeal. And then fast forward to my second one, that's when I actually lost my leg. And I don't think that one was as, I think I gained more from losing my leg than I actually lost by, the flesh being taken from me. And a lot of people wouldn't look at things that way, but having gone through what I did and experienced what I did, and over the years, like, I can't look back on that particular moment and not think that all of it is a direct result of losing the actual leg. So the second incident, funny as it may be, I don't really define it as the more catastrophic one.
Interesting. And you discharged out of the Army in August of 2012, and I assume that period from March of 2011 to August of 2012 was all focused on recovery and rehab and surgeries and all of that other stuff. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's the setup for, if you will, the second chapter of life, which is pretty damn good.
Very true. Very true. So I went to San Antonio, Texas for the CFI, which is the Center for Intrepid, for my rehab, which is an amazing facility. If people who are listening, if you don't know about it, look into it. It's great. That's where I did my rehab, and a lot of guys were coming back with pretty much the same injuries pretty rapidly. Leg injuries were common. Guys with 2 limbs missing were more common than we would expect. And then you would occasionally see someone with a triple amputation, and that's pretty tough. So I say all of that because it kind of fills in why my rehab was a bit different than theirs. When I first got there, I was one of the last ones to kind of come through with an amputation. There were still gunshot wounds coming through and stuff, but things had kind of started slowing down as far as the rate of soldiers coming back. And as I'm rehabbing, I was very fortunate. I didn't have a lot of the setbacks that people have. There's HO, which is a bone regrowth. Some people get these extremely painful neuropathies that won't allow them to progress into their prosthetics. There's any number of issues that could arise. And I was fortunate. The only real setback I had was when they removed my stitches. A little part of the wound kind of opened up, and so that had to just kind of heal from the inside out on its own. It wasn't really a big deal. It just slowed it by about 3 weeks. At that point, I could do things before I even got the prosthetic with the wound care still, but I wasn't really doing like super active things. But I was noticing that it's not that I was being neglected at the rehab facility, but there were people that just needed more care, and there weren't enough therapists to do the jobs. So naturally, they would get the care. And how dare I sit there with one leg and complain about someone who's missing 3 limbs needing help? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I never really got mad about it. I just said, well, I'm going to have to do something if I want to do something in the future. And I did have a good therapist. He did help me, but his focus had to be with the ones that needed more care. And he would set me up, get me started, and then he would just kind of leave me to it. And then I don't like sucking at things. So it's very hard for me to do something and just not be good at it. And if I'm not good at it, well, I have to do it more until it doesn't have to be perfect, but I should be able to do it.
It's attitude, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's all a matter of how bad do you want something, and if you want it bad enough, you'll get it. And I didn't want to be stuck in the chair. I didn't want to be stuck not being who I wanted to be in any sense of whatever that might be.
And in your mind, because you mentioned it briefly, and it's important going forward, you were this athletic, competitive kid.
Very much so.
And in your mind during this rehab, you're thinking about what I want to do because of what I've done. Right.
And one of the first things that was brought to me while I was in rehab was actually golf. And I had played golf in high school, and I like golf. It's not high impact, fast enough for me. I do enjoy the sport, but it wasn't where I wanted to be at the time.
You needed a little more adrenaline pumping.
Correct.
Listen to this full episode and more on the Apple Podcasts app, Blog Talk Radio, Google Podcasts, or iHeartRadio. And now streaming on Amazon Music, Audible, and Spotify.